Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you're listening from. Welcome back to Sophie's Stories, the podcast bringing you original, handcrafted stories right into your ear holes. From my mouth and my hands sometimes. Sounds a bit dirty, but I didn't mean it like that. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. It's been a little while. I was on holiday 100% last week, and I am of the mind that rest means rest. So I had to take the rest that I very sorely needed, but I am back this week and readier than ever to bring you some super exciting stuff and keep bringing you fabulous tales, sordid stories from all walks of life and from my own brain sometimes too. So there's that. But today, the sordid story that I will be talking about is from a banned book. Now, if you haven't heard this podcast before, I basically oscillate between investigating banned books. I'm super interested in censorship, what it means to censor the written word and what effects that could have on us in the future. And also, I write my own stories, so there's some relaxing chill stories, there's some interesting crime stories, and also the banned book series. So I hope you'll find something here that you enjoy listening to. So, all of that brings me to the subject of today's episode, which is an extremely interesting story. Because today, I'll be talking about Spycatcher, the candid autobiography of a senior intelligence officer. A memoir written by Peter Wright, and that is Wright, not right as in you're right-handed. Now, Peter Wright, for some context, was a former, by the way, I really hope I don't get like a mysterious Men in Black knock on the door from doing this podcast. It is a serious consideration and concern of mine. But anyway, I'm back to Peter Wright. Now, Peter Wright was a former MI5 officer and an assistant director. In this particular book that we're going to be looking at today, he drew on his own life experiences in MI5 and included his own research into the history of British intelligence. Oh, it's going to be a real juicy one. It's going to be so real. So sit back and relax. And as usual, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Peter Wright and his life so that we can understand what brought him to write the book in the first place, what influences have affected it, and of course, why was this book banned? Okie dokie, so let's chat a little bit about the writer's life. So Peter Wright was born in Derbyshire in August 1916. Most notably, his father was George Maurice Wright, CBE, who was the Director of Research at the Marconi Company. For anyone listening who doesn't know, a CBE is short for Commander of the British Empire. I have a little quote from the Cabinet Office as a description, so please indulge me, just in case. Quote, a prominent national role of a lesser degree, a conspicuous leading role in regional affairs through achievement or service to the community, or a highly distinguished innovative contribution in his or her area of activity, close quote. And just for some more context around that, some other people who have received a CBE are the likes of Stephen Hawking, Harold Pinter, Hugh Laurie, Johnny Wilkinson, who is a very famous rugby player, was in fact, and Helena Bonham Carter. So that is actually the length and breadth of the celebrity news I'll ever be doing on this podcaster's channel, so I really hope you enjoyed that 5-second cameo. But that's just to give you an idea. So I will continue on Peter's life. So his dad had a CBE. He was the director of research at the Marconi Company, and interestingly, the Marconi Company were one of the founders of signals intelligence during World War I. Now, this was particularly interesting considering what his son Peter went on to do with his life and the impact he sowed from releasing his book, seeing as it was all about communications. Now, back to Peter. He was educated in an independent boarding school for boys in Hertfordshire and then in St. Peter's College in Oxford. Wright graduated just before the beginning of the Second World War in September of 1939. Now, Wright's next move was to start work at the Admiralty Research Laboratory. Just for some background on the Admiralty Research Laboratory, because it sounds quite vague. When I read it, I was like, this is curious that he worked somewhere so very vague after, being the son of someone quite prominent in British society and having a fantastic level of education, a privileged education, some might say. It was curious that he went on to have a job that was seemingly beige. But let's have a listen about some background on the Admiralty Research Laboratory. So this research lab supported the work of the Admiralty, which was a department of the government of the United Kingdom. And this is where it gets interesting. They were responsible for the Navy until 1964, when, interestingly, they were replaced by the Admiralty Board, who were ultimately responsible for the creation of the Ministry of Defence, and subsequently its Navy Department or Division. Now, you might be wondering why I'm going into so much detail on this. Why bother going through the history and subsequent journey of Peter Wright's first job out of college? Well, because when you first hear Admiralty Research Laboratory, you think, oh, that sounds all right. Sounds like just research and stuff. I don't know. But what it actually shows is the possibility that Peter's father's background and therefore his life path were always skewed to working in the support of the ministry, in this case of defence. And with a strong background in communications and knowledge of communication during the wartime period, it was no wonder he ended up where he did. Now, Peter remained at the Admiralty Research Laboratory until 1946, when he took up the position as Principal Scientific Officer at the Service's Electronics Research Laboratory. The Service's Electronics Research Laboratory, or CERL for short, quote, was established in 1945 at Harlow and Baldock as the research department for contract valve development. They were a specialist material manufacturer in military electronics, end quote. Also, Harlow and Baldock sounds like something from Harry Potter. It just does. Now, his life, as it is accounted for in his book, and all of the things that happened to him subsequently when he began working for MI5, was initially on a part-time basis. So his life at MI5 started on a part-time basis in spring of 1949, when he was appointed as a Navy scientist. This role was closely intertwined with work going on at the Marconi Company. the company his father worked for. Now, as I carry on throughout the story, I'm going to have to continue to talk about his life and the book a little bit in tandem, so I'll probably repeat some stuff because the book is a memoir, unlike the other episodes I've done like this, where we get to do the sort of writer's life and their work separately. And then after that, we'll get to the trial and publication. Personally, my favourite part, because it's where all the juice is located, and I'm going to squeeze it. So, let's leave that behind. Now, according to Spycatcher, the book we're actually here to talk about, and by the way, this is all according to his memoir. I'm not claiming this, nor do I have any personal connection to this story. Before anyone decides it would be a good idea to come for me for any reason, this is basically all alleged because it was in his memoir. So, allegedly, during his time with MI5, Wright wrote about being heavily involved in resolving an issue concerning a covert listening device, or bug as we now know them, which was found in a replica of the Great Seal of the United States, and it was presented to the US ambassador in Moscow in 1945. It was presented to him by the Young Pioneer Organization of the Soviet Union, which, and I quote, "The Vladimir Lenin All-Union Pioneer Organization, abbreviated as the Young Pioneers, was a compulsory youth organization of the Soviet Union for children and adolescents ages 9 to 14 that existed between 1922 and 1991." End quote. So Peter Wright confirmed that the device that was found in the seal was actually a condenser microphone, basically, as we now know them, that only became active at a certain level of megahertz, or a certain megahertz rate. Good God. I mean, I am using a microphone right now, but please don't ask me any questions about it. And sent these sound, and basically, so it collected the sound wave signals and sent them to a remote transmitter. Interestingly too, this particular device was finally attributed to the Soviet inventor Leon Theremin. Do you recognise that name? Yes, it's the very same Leon Theremin who invented the instrument the theremin and patented it in 1928. From tiny microphones to super impressive instruments. But, my friends, this story is not about Leon, and of course it is about Peter Wright, so let me get back to it. After a few more years, in 1954, Wright became the principal scientific officer for MI5. In this role, as stated in his memoir, he was responsible for the creation of some basic ELINT methods. What is ELINT, you may ask? Well, don't worry, I don't do half jobs here, as you can tell by the very length of this podcast already. But let me tell you what that is. Quote, ELINT, or electronic intelligence, refers to any intelligence that is gathered from electronic signals. In other words, only non-communications intelligence. ELINT signals include radio, or electromagnetic pulses and signals that are emitted from radars, missiles, guidance systems, and aircrafts, close quote. And that is where my discussion on ELINT will end. You can look it up if you'd like to learn some more. There's a link to all the sources I've used for this story in the description, so you can go and have a look for yourself if you're interested. But I am not a tech or science or tech science podcast, so I'm not going to go into it. And maybe if someone is an expert in that, you can drop some comments in the comments below, because that is not my area of expertise whatsoever. So after that, but you can see where his career is going. He's making some significant contributions in his area of expertise. So, you know, it would be interesting to think about whether that gives his story or his stories that are present in his memoir credence or not. I'm just trying to give a sort of balanced view, because what happens in the trial is very, very interesting. So I'm kind of trying to do as balanced as possible. So Peter then worked as the first chairman of the newly created Radio Operations Committee, or ROC for short, when it began in 1960. This was when the earlier separate British intelligence organisations finally combined their efforts. Peter noted that this was the first time MI5, MI6 and GCHQ, the Government Communications Headquarters, had worked together effectively since the last war, which was the Second World War. And then just 4 short years later, in 1964, Peter Wright was promoted to be chairman of the joint MI5 and MI6 committee, which was codenamed Fluency. This was a particularly interesting culmination of group members who were selected to find lingering Soviet agents and moles still remaining in Britain. Peter Wright himself interviewed a man often who went by the name of Anthony Blunt. Anthony Blunt was alleged to be part of the Cambridge Five. The Cambridge Five, you may be interested to know, were supposedly active during the Second World War and the Cold War, and were infamous for passing information to the Soviet Union. And I will say very importantly at this juncture that none of the alleged members were actually prosecuted for spying, but I'll leave that discernment up to you, and you can go and do a bit of research yourself to see what you think of the Cambridge Five. Now, I'm going to round up, this is a sort of end of the information about Peter Wright's life, and next we're going to go on to a bit more detail in the content of the book. I think it's super important that we go over the actual content. I know I mentioned some things there that are present in the book because obviously they were part of his life, but now we're going to have a bit of a deeper look at it. And I think the next section will give you some pretty good ideas as to why this book was banned and why people are having issues doing some further research into its claims. So yeah, I will leave you for a break. Just give me 2 secs. So, lovely folks, now that I've given possibly the run-up of the century, what was in this book that sparked both governmental and public interest? And what led to its ban? Well, thankfully, we are all about to find out. So, sit back, grab your popcorn, let me tell you about it. Straight off the top, one of Peter Wright's first alleged assignments was to uncover a Soviet mole who was active in MI5. Wright alleged that this mole was a man by the name of Roger Hollis. And I say alleged because straight from the MI5 website, and I quote, "In 1981, allegations were published claiming that Sir Roger had been a Soviet secret agent. These were investigated and found to be groundless." Close quote. I will also add as a small note here, there was no other information on the investigation, any further details on this that I could find. If you do know some, please drop them in the comments or let me know. I'm more than happy to talk about it and add some edits. But yeah, I couldn't really find anything else. So I'll leave that up to your own discernment, dear listener. Now, I also couldn't find the reason behind the discrepancy in the date here between the publication of Spycatcher that was published in 1985 originally, and the date stated on the MI5 website about the allegations, which was 1981. However, I did find one earlier publication of this information in 1984 by investigative journalist by the name of Chapman Pincher, which was called Too Secret, Too Long. And it was based on the earlier life of Roger Hollis's MI5 career, or the earlier part of Roger Hollis's MI5 career. This particular work used new sources and various interviews with some retired members of intelligence personnel. So from my own deduction, I can only assume, it's not conjecture, but I can only assume that there were some interviews conducted that were then published around the year 1981 that were then used in Chapman Pincher's work, which was the earliest work I could find containing the claim regarding Roger Hollis. And also another really important note as we're talking about this, also Roger Hollis sadly passed away in October of 1973. So at the time that the claims surfaced, he did not have the chance to defend himself nor be interviewed in any case regarding the allegations. So I wouldn't like to say much more here. He's not here to defend himself now, and he wasn't at the time, so I think we'll just let that lie. But I just wanted you to know that right off the bat, it was one of the first allegations that Peter Wright wrote about in his book. Let me know what your thoughts are. If you have any extra info, do let me know. But this point was really important because it's just to give you a bit of a taste of the book. Overall, the book generally examined the techniques used by the intelligence services. It critically deconstructed their internal ethical mode of operation, even exposing their alleged 11th commandment, which supposedly was, quote, "Thou shalt not get caught," end quote. Interestingly, in an afterword that Peter Wright included in his book, he stated that he mainly wrote the book to account for income losses after it was decided that his pension from the GCHQ to his last position was not transferable. So all the work that he did before he was in MI5, the pension wasn't transferable to his latest role. So then when he became, the assistant director at MI5, none of his past work attributed into his current pension. So he did say that that was one of the chief reasons why he wrote this book. So very interesting to know and very important to understand the context of this book as we're going forward. So I'm going to have a quick breather and then we're going to jump right into the publication and trial, and good God, you better believe that I am really excited to tell you about this, because it's the kind of juice and conspiracy that personally I live for. It's so difficult when you're so interested in something to give a super balanced view, because it interests you. It's always going to sound skewed one way or another, but I'm trying my best. And yeah, let me tell you about the trial in just a sec. Right, so now we are on to the publication, the trial, the banning, and the republication of this book. This is always my favourite part of these episodes, and this one is particularly interesting and complex because it has consequences that have been felt as recently as 2021. So let me just get on into this. I hope you're sitting comfortably, really and truly. So let me just carry on. Peter Wright originally wrote the book Spycatcher whilst he was in Tasmania, which is an island state of Australia, following his retirement from MI5. I just said retirement really weird. I just said it like retirement. I need some new tires for your truck. Retirement. Words get weird when you're talking for like an hour. He tried to publish the book in the year 1985, but the British government almost instantaneously procured a court order banning the publication. However, this court order only banned Spycatcher in the United Kingdom. This meant that the book was still available to be purchased wherever else it was published, save the UK. Obviously, this was not the age of the internet, so the information in the book wasn't spreading as quickly as it probably would nowadays. It's possible that the British government thought that giving rise to the book would accelerate the information spread. However, in 1987, the UK government applied for another court order to ban the publication in Australia. But a lawyer working for the publisher there, named Malcolm Turnbull, was successful in resisting this application. On the back of this failure, any English newspaper who attempted to report on the contents within the book were served gag orders. Upon attempting to persist their reporting or conduct further investigation, they were actually tried for contempt of court. All of these charges, however, were eventually dropped. So, in this case, it's important for me to note that not only was it a published book, sorry, my brain just went, no. So not only is it important to note, not only that was this a published book that the British government was attempting to quash, they were also attempting to control the media's reporting of the information in the book. Now, to give some balance to this story as I tell it, just to try and keep it from becoming a railroading event, which is not at all the purpose of me telling this story. The purpose is 100% education. Many of the people who had accusations thrown their way throughout his book were not actually found guilty. So, you know, of course, it is an option that these people had never committed any of the acts they were accused of, and the British government were attempting to stop the spread of untrue and harmful information, which could have long-term effects on those people and their children or associates for years to come, which is pretty understandable. You know, if someone hasn't actually I mean, there are lots of ways to look at this, and I'm not going to continue to talk about it for too much longer, but that could be a way to view the British government's reaction to the information that was contained within this book and why they took the actions they did in trying to control the spread of this information. Obviously, if the information is untrue or was unfounded or was found to be untrue later, it would have already had detrimental effects on people's lives. So that is also a possibility. And look, in almost every one of these episodes, my Scottish ego is just getting just like woo, because girl, we're really good at like keeping our books pretty true to form, like how they were originally published. So another shout out for Scotland here. As you know, if you've heard any of my other episodes, I do love to indulge in a little bit of Scottish attitudes to life, and this is certainly one of them. The book Spycatcher continued to be sold in Scotland, and none of the Scottish newspapers at the time were beholden to any English gag order. Additionally, it's unsurprising that many copies of the book just happened to reach English citizens from Scotland, and they were also smuggled to other parts of the world back into England too. So people were really interested in reading this book. They wanted to know what it's about, and people were also absolutely stringent about getting it to the people who wanted to read it in England. So we had you back, just remember. A super interesting TV report that was broadcast at the time followed a newspaper reporter, wait until you hear this story. So a newspaper reporter flew to Australia and back, declaring, so he flew all the way to Australia, bought the books, flew all the way back, and then declared that he had brought 10 copies of the book back with him. However, the customs officers did not remove the books from his belongings as they had not been instructed to do so. I feel like you would be so disappointed if you spent like the 20 or so hour flight to Australia and then the 20 or so hour flight back, all to film this sketch for the news. And expect it to cause a ruckus, expect it to be a really important piece of journalism that would turn the idea of censorship on its head, only to be told you're all good, you carry on sir with your books, do your thing. Oh my gosh, you'd be so angry, you'd be so annoyed. That is a long trip. So obviously, regardless of the content of the book, all this controversy secured Wright some serious return on his investment. So, in mid-1987, a High Court judge removed the ban on English newspapers reporting on Spycatcher. Although, 2 months later, the 12 Lords of Appeal rebuked this decision and banned the media from reporting on Wright's claims for a second time. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe they'd had one glass of wine too many that night, because that did not last long. But this turned out to be yet another small turn in the large roller coaster that this story of this book, because the same 12 Lords of Appeal cleared the book for sale in 1988, after they actually acknowledged that it in fact contained no secrets. It's a very similar thing to what happened with Lady Chatterley's Lover that I've done an episode on. It's on my Spotify. The people who are publishing, banning, or tampering with the release of these books are not actually reading them. They don't know what the content of the actual work is. It's absolute madness. So, to add insult to this back and forth, Wright was then prevented from receiving royalties on the books that were sold in England. So it's all just, they just don't want him to have his pension. You know. It's a lot. So anyway, I don't know what that face was, but how did this all end? Well, eventually in 1999, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that the British government had broken their convention when it gagged its own newspapers. In 1993, the Centre for the Study of Intelligence, who were working from the CIA, published a review on the book that stated that the book contained, and I quote, factual data, end quote, and was, open quote, filled with errors, exaggerations, bogus ideas, and self-inflation, close quote. It would be prudent to note here that the errors that they found in the review, so they were like, oh, we found it was full of errors. It would be prudent to note that they didn't specify what the errors were. Now you might say that's because they can't clarify the real meaning of the error. You know, they can't say, oh, well, there weren't any like Soviet spies in England at this time, but there were some at this time. You know, that would probably be like not a great idea. But they were completely unspecified. There was no like where what direction is that? Like there was none of that. So we're almost coming to the end here, but I do want to close this off and let you know what happened to Peter, what was the result of his works, and the result of this huge big roller coaster. So in 1995, Wright sadly passed away. However, his book has sold overall more than 2 million copies, and Peter Wright died a millionaire from the proceeds of his book. So we can say, right or wrong, did you see what I did there? Right or wrong? God, put me in the bin. That regardless of the substantiation of his claims or information present in his book, it was entertaining and titillating in any case, and drew a very large readership. Now, I did say there was some interesting stuff going on with this story in more recent years. So I found a very compelling article published by The Guardian and written by John Ungode Thomas. It tells of how the Cabinet Office has been accused of, quote, delay and deception, as it would not release the appropriate files that would substantiate or debunk Peter Wright's claims from the book. So this news came after the award-winning documentary maker Tim Tate, who wanted access to the files, said that the government officials were withholding documents that they thought may cause political embarrassment. It's a super interesting article. I definitely take a look at it. The link is in the description if you'd like to read it for yourself. I'm pretty sure it's the only Guardian link. So yeah, have a little look at John Ungode's work there and see what you think. Also, just another note here, while I was doing my research, I found something interesting. So also Tim Tate has produced some very interesting work in terms of the documentaries he's produced, and some of it is actually available to watch on his website. I've no affiliations, I just saw some of the things and they're super interesting. So I've left a link in the description to his page as well if you'd like to go and have a look there too. They look super interesting. But anyway, back to the story. A quote from Tim Tate on the matter was as follows, open quote, "They behaved appallingly, as if the law does not apply to them," end quote, and open quote, "It is a waste of public money over documents which should be in the public domain," close quote. Now, John Ungode Thomas also makes an important point in his article, pointing out that the majority of government documents are released after 30 years has passed. He also noted that, quote, "Officials have cited various exemptions under the Freedom of Information Act to block publication of the Spycatcher files," close quote. So this was a rather tumultuous ending to this episode, and I am completely sure that we haven't heard the end of this story quite yet. However, all in all, I think the subject of this episode is interesting for one reason in particular, and that is, where is the line in the sand that separates misinformation and possible propaganda from information sanitization? That's the question I'd love to answer with these episodes in this series. But the truth is, we'll probably never know the real answer to that question in this particular case. But I would urge you to think over this when you next hear the news, when you read gossip columns, and when you consume anything that would attempt to change your mind. Some questions to consider. What do you know? What do your past experiences tell you? And possibly most importantly, what is your gut telling you? So thank you all so much for listening as usual. I can't wait to bring you the next episode. But for now, please look after yourselves. And you can find all of the resources I used to create this episode in the description box. If there's anything you'd like to look up or research yourself, then you can go ahead and have a look. All of my other episodes are available on Spotify. I think I'm about to hit 50 episodes, which is really, really cool. So if you'd like to go and have a look there, you absolutely can. I've done a few other episodes like this, so if this took your fancy, then please go ahead. And I can't wait to get back to you. But for the time being, look after yourselves and don't forget to stay curious. Bye.